Hello, BookTube. I've recently fallen into the pernicious habit of just bombarding you with book recommendations for no reason whatsoever. Uh, this is bad for a number of reasons, and also predictable because it's one of my favorite things to do. I love talking about books with you. I just do. So I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to do a few more book recommendations, things that I can recommend in one way or another. Not all of these are sing-songy great recommendations, but all of them have their worth, and some of them you might value more than I do. And this list today is going to be heavy on my favorite kind of book, biographies. Starting with this one, this is Jan Cohn. This is improbable fiction. This is a life of Mary Roberts Reinhardt, who is not remembered today, but once upon a time was the best-selling author in the country, the American Agatha Christie. And her novels are terrific. She also wrote a few other things, too. She wrote her whole life. She was an indefatigable writer of all kinds, and if you offered her a deadline prose piece of work, she would take it. And I only know of one other biography, so this one is really good. It's really thorough. I could very much stand, no offense to this book at all, it's quite good, but I could very much stand a new life of Mary Roberts Reinhardt. That would be really good. Instead of 10 biographies of Patton. But even my own favorite genre partakes of a little bit of residual sexism. And considering the fact that in a few years, right now, effectively, there are no men working anywhere in publishing in the United States, I want to stress what I've said many times on this channel, which is that two wrongs don't make a right. But in the meantime, we move on to this. This is David Noakes. This is his book, Jonathan Swift, A Hypocrite Reversed. This is called a critical biography, and that means not only analyzing the prose, but also a little bit on the nitpicky side. This is most biographies of Jonathan Swift. We saw one on one of these random ass recommendation videos by Leo Damrosch. Most biographies of Jonathan Swift are very much friendly to him. And this one is admiring of him, but the corners that could be cut through friendliness are not cut here. So it makes for invigorating reading. I would say invigorating reading if you're already familiar with Swift's life. If you've already read, for instance, the Leo Damrosch book, which I really think is one of the best all-purpose accessible biographies of Swift that are out there. But if you find this character fascinating, I do, then you definitely want to get to this book eventually. I don't know that I'd make it the first one. Then we have a work of history by Guy de la Baudelaire, the French, I swear. This is his book, Real Lives of Roman Britain. I've written about most of these books. I have no idea if those pieces are findable, but this is about, it takes advantage. We know a huge amount about Rome's occupation of Britain, and so you can go at that occupation from any number of different angles. Military histories, for instance, are big, or were once upon a time. Social histories are immensely possible. We know so much about the trinkets and the lives of the people involved here that you really can write a book like The Real Lives of Roman Britain and it not be false. Usually when you're talking about ancient Rome, for instance, in Italy itself, if an author writes The Real Lives of Romans, the chapter 1 is going to be about what people probably ate for breakfast, and then chapters 2 through 10 are going to be about the emperors. But that isn't true in this case. This guy is really good. I've read pretty much every work of his that's been, I assume, translated into English, and I've loved it all. Really good stuff. There are a million books about Roman Britain, so you have a plethora to choose from. But this one is new enough so that it might be at your library. Then we have Gordon Teskey. I go back and forth with this author. We don't have a smooth relationship. This is a great big tome called The Poetry of John Milton. It's analysis, it's history, it's literary criticism. It's tricky when you have a book like this, regardless of who the poet is. It's extra tricky when it's someone like Milton, actually, or Swift, too. It's extra tricky when it's someone like Milton because his life, his non-writing life, was so bewilderingly complicated. But it's important to remember if you're browsing at a used bookstore or whatever, and you come across a book that says The Poetry of John Donne or the poetry, well, something like this, The Poetry of John Milton, that you're getting one person's look. It sounds very monumental, but this is just Teskey's look at that poetry. And there are plenty of people out there who would disagree with some of his interpretations. Although not his history. This is actually very meaty. If you were going to build a shelf of Milton books in the modern age, I would put this on that shelf. Again, though, like with a couple of other things that are on this list, you would need already to be interested in Milton and probably to know a little about him. You would certainly, I would think, need to have read his major poems. Which once upon a time would be self-evident, but I don't think Milton is taught much in schools anymore. I certainly don't think that college undergraduates are made to read Paradise Lost. So it's entirely possible that you may not have read Paradise Lost. You're going to need to read Paradise Lost and to know it, be on fairly up terms with it. But if you've got that grounding and you're looking for a book to read about the work of John Milton, this one's terrific. Then we have a biography. This is George Marsden. This is his big, fat biography of the New England divine Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was a deeply disturbed figure, a religious zealot, but also very, very interesting. A lot of the writings that we have from him are fire and brimstone, pretty much the original New England fire and brimstone preacher, but there are odd moments that wink out from all of that writing, even the worst of it, that are quiet, meditative. This is necessarily a religious life. That was almost everything to do with Edwards. But Marsden is great with him walking down the street, with him going to market, as much as we can know. And he's also really good with the literature. Nobody reads all of Jonathan Edwards anymore. Nobody reads any of Jonathan Edwards anymore. He's famous now in anthologies for one famous sermon that he gave, which is remarkably hallucinatory to read out loud. You should read his one famous sermon out loud. But this book is so much more than that. It's that overused word. It's magisterial. There aren't any new documents about Jonathan Edwards. It would only be new interpretation. And this book shies so far away from interpretation that really it's one of those biographies where you think, okay, well, I enjoyed that, and also I don't think there's any need for another biography of this figure. So another strong recommend, but boy, oh boy, it's in the weeds. You're going to have to be interested in the subject already. This next one is by Michael Everett. It also is in the weeds, but it is a little bit higher profile. The subject is a little bit higher profile. This is his book, The Rise of Thomas Cromwell. And Cromwell is higher profile because of the TV production of The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, also because of the 3 novels by Hilary Mantel, which are told from Cromwell's point of view. Cromwell was a block of muscle. He was a leg breaker and a deal maker for King Henry VIII, and rose in power until he became very prominent. And that's a dangerous place to be with a Tudor monarch who is slowly succumbing to psychopathy. That is a dangerous place to be. The minute Henry gets whiff, I'm not saying that Cromwell was rightly executed, but the minute Henry got whiff of a powerful minister making statecraft in Henry's name without Henry's knowledge, you were doomed. Whether you were Cardinal Wolsey or whether you were Thomas Cromwell or whether you were Thomas More, it didn't matter. Once he thought that the node of authority in the country had moved or divided from himself, he became ruthless. Mindlessly so, since he regretted his whole life that he had More executed, he regretted his whole life that he had Wolsey executed, and he regretted his whole life that he had Cromwell executed. I mean, he was going to execute Wolsey. He didn't get there. He didn't get the chance. Wolsey died instead. This is really good. It seems a little heretical to recommend this thing when Dermot McCullough's full life of Cromwell is out there and is, again, like the Jonathan Edwards book, definitive. But this is still really good, especially with the word in the subtitle there, the politics of court. Very, very enjoyable, the way this author writes about it. It's not the whole story. The whole story is adumbrated, but you can get the whole story from the book. Again, I would say, if you don't already have an interest in Tudor politics or Thomas Cromwell, probably start somewhere else. But if you do, you want this book. You want to try it anyway. Get it from the library and see if it suits you. Then we have Tim Hilton. This is a massive thing, a gigantic biography of a completely forgotten figure who once upon a time bestrode the narrow world like a colossus. This is John Ruskin. This is Hilton's gigantic biography of John Ruskin. Just a big plug of a thing. Difficult. It would be difficult nowadays in 2025 to explain what Ruskin was to his world. But we've seen him before on this channel, of course, many, many times. He was a public intellectual of the first water, a fantastic but very obscure writer. His writings, especially his personal writings, could be almost impenetrable. And he led a fascinating life, a fascinating, brave, public life, almost entirely public. And Hilton does a massive amount of research in this book, just massive. So this book is not actually the kind of thing where I say you need to know about Ruskin in order to read it. But you have to care about Ruskin to embark on 1,000 pages about this guy, and I don't know anybody who does. If you want a big, involving, just enveloping life of a fascinating intellectual, the smartest man in the world in his day, you should find a used copy of this, because Hilton does a really good job. Then we have Shakespeare and the Countess. This is by Chris Laturis, and this is a big Shakespeare book. It's too big. It's bigger than the factual materials underlying it really warrant. I don't know who that is on the cover up top there, but that's the Countess in question. This is talking about land dealings, professional dealings. This is very much Shakespeare, the professional actor and theater manager, and not Shakespeare, the playwright, so much. Although Shakespeare, the playwright, is quoted all throughout here, and the book boils down to a few scattered references, basically one close-knit index card. And yet the book itself is 500 pages long. It's a classic example of what Mark Twain used to make fun of with Shakespeare books, where it's like a brontosaurus in the museum. It's a couple of bones and 200 pounds of plaster of Paris. It's a lot like that, but the author is really good. The author is really lively. So you'll be reading along and he'll be burbling about the time period or about theatrical practices or whatnot. And you'll be having fun. You'll be enjoying yourself. And then every, 90 pages, 100 pages or so, every 100 pages or so, you'll bark your shin on an actual fact. And you won't mind. You won't hold it against the author. This is not a Shakespeare book to keep forever. I always say if there's a shelf of books about so-and-so, such and such a book would be on it. With Shakespeare, it would be a whole bookcase, and this would not be on that bookcase. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth your time, especially if, like me, you are a Shakespeare addict. You love reading about him, anything about him. I am, so I gobbled up this book. I think I wrote about it. Then we have another biography, a classic of biography. This is John Mack, A Prince of Our Disorder, which is a life of Lawrence of Arabia that is a perfect counterpoint to the great big official life of Lawrence of Arabia, and a perfect counterpoint to a lot of the romanticism that sprung up around this character, largely at his own behest. He wasn't a victim of that. It was only at the very end of his life that he started to have a wry look at the fact that he was a legend. Before that, he was eagerly building the legend himself. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Not that anybody's going to. Let's just put it this way. The movie, Lawrence of Arabia, there is no one in the history of the world who would have applauded that movie more loudly than Lawrence of Arabia. Let's just put it that way. Although he didn't have anything like the star power of a young Peter O'Toole, about whom famously in Lawrence of Arabia, one person famously quipped that if he were any better looking in the movie, it would be called Florence of Arabia. Mack is not reverential. He's not smashing idols, but he's much, I hate to say it, he's much more readable than the official biography, even though I love the official biography. He's much more readable, much more gripping. This is a masterwork of biography, of a difficult subject, right? A difficult figure to do it with. And then the last book that we'll do for this time around is by Ted Morgan, and it was a famous book in its day. This is Churchill, Young Man in a Hurry, about a young, conniving Winston Churchill. So this is Churchill from when he was a boy to when he was a teenager to when he was having larger-than-life adventures under fire, on horseback, in various brush wars, all the way into the eve of the First World War. So this is a Churchill that we would be reading about, and there would be many biographies and maybe a statue and certainly maybe a movie if he died at the end of this book. We'd still be reading about this figure if he died at the end of this book. No one had any idea, including especially Churchill. Don't let him convince you otherwise. No one had any idea in 1915 that he would go on to become what A.J.P. Taylor referred to unironically as the savior of his country. No one thought that. At the time, he was just a conniving, largely untrustworthy, hyper-literate fop. And Ted Morgan does a great job. Again, not meaning to be mean, the kind of iconoclasm that is not meaning to be mean. It's just meaning to give you a fresh portrait of a figure. So I'm not the foremost fan of this guy, and I'm a tough audience to please when it comes to Churchill books, and I like this one. So maybe you would too. Young Churchill, you will not be getting even the Dardanelles. You won't even be getting his failures in World War I, let alone the wilderness years or anything to do with World War II. You won't be getting any of that here. But there you go. There's just a few more recommendations for you out of nowhere. So no rhyme or reason to them. I'll wrap this up and maybe we'll do this again. Thank you, BookTube.